NATO air power is being reshaped quietly.
For my conversations with many leaders in Europe, in the United States, Canada, is an approach where we say it has to be end-to-end.
The reason is not a new alliance policy, not a new threat assessment, and not a new weapons program. It is maintenance, and the question of who is allowed to perform it. Not in a briefing room, not in a strategy document, in a hangar at the end of a runway, where a jet either gets fixed or it does not. That is where control is exercised, and that is where something is changing inside the alliance. Air power outcomes begin on the ground. Availability starts before the mission. Every sortie flown, every mission completed, every coverage maintained begins with a decision about whether an aircraft is fit to fly. That decision is not made by the pilot. It is made by whoever holds the authority to certify that the work has been done correctly. That authority is maintenance control. And for decades inside NATO, it has not lived inside the nations that operate the aircraft. It has lived elsewhere. An engine is not a static object. It is a system of constant degradation and recovery. Every flight hour accumulates wear across thousands of components. Every landing, every temperature cycle, every thrust demand leaves a measurable mark. The question is never whether maintenance is needed. The question is, who is authorized to provide it, where it can be performed, and under whose certification the aircraft returns to service. That distinction matters more than it appears. Owning an aircraft and being authorized to maintain it are not the same thing. A nation can take delivery of a fleet, train its pilots, build its squadrons, and still find that the most critical decisions about that fleet's availability sit outside its own institutions. Certification authority, approved repair procedures, component sourcing requirements, and overhaul standards are all defined by external program structures. The aircraft is present. The control is not. Maintenance is not supported. Maintenance is the mechanism through which availability is either granted or withheld. If you control maintenance authorization, you control the pace at which a fleet recovers. You control how long aircraft sit on the ground between missions. You control how quickly a nation can respond when readiness drops. This is the asset at the center of the localization debate. Not the hangar, not the tooling, not even the technicians. The asset is the authorization to say that an aircraft is ready to fly. That authorization and the question of where it resides is what the argument is actually about. To understand how maintenance control operates inside NATO, it breaks into 3 threads. Each one determines who depends on whom. The first thread is certification authority. Before a maintained aircraft returns to service, the work must be certified as complete and correct. That certification does not belong automatically to the nation operating the aircraft. It belongs to whoever holds the approved authority under the program's maintenance framework. In many cases, that authority is held by the original equipment manufacturer, by a designated maintenance organization in another country, or by a program office operating outside the operator's borders. A nation whose technicians performed the work correctly still cannot return that aircraft to service without sign-off from an external authority. The work is local. The permission is not. The second thread is approved data. Every maintenance action on a modern fighter engine is governed by approved data. Approved data means the specific procedures, tolerances, and component specifications that the program has authorized for use. Operators cannot deviate from that data without formal approval. They cannot substitute a locally available component if it falls outside the approved parts list. They cannot modify a procedure to suit local conditions without going through a change process that is controlled externally. The technicians may be standing in front of the aircraft. The data that governs what they are allowed to do is held somewhere else. The third thread is overhaul access. At defined intervals, fighter engines require deep maintenance that goes beyond what line crews can perform. Components must be disassembled, inspected at a level that requires specialized equipment, rebuilt to original specifications, and certified before return to service. For most NATO operators, that overhaul work does not happen domestically. It routes to centralized facilities, often in the country of manufacture, where the required equipment, expertise, and certification authority are concentrated. The engine leaves the country. It returns on a timeline the operator did not set. During that period, the aircraft it powers is unavailable. The nation's fleet size on paper does not change. Its actual availability does. NATO's maintenance structure was built around a logic that made complete sense at the time. Concentrating overhaul capability in specialized facilities reduced duplication, lowered costs across the alliance, and ensured that complex work was performed by technicians with deep and consistent expertise.
The field is growing exponentially, over 200 now, and there'll be many, many more going as we increase their production ramp here.
Not every nation needed to build the same infrastructure. Shared facilities served multiple operators efficiently and kept standards uniform across the fleet. Line maintenance stayed closer to the operator. Routine servicing, inspections between flights, and minor repairs were performed locally by national technicians working from approved data. But the deeper the maintenance requirement, the further authority moved from the operator. Intermediate work routed to regional hubs. Major overhauls routed to centralized facilities. Certification authority followed the same direction. The more significant the maintenance action, the less of it lived inside the nation performing it. That structure concentrated expertise. It also concentrated control. The nations hosting the centralized facilities held something that was never described as leverage, but functioned exactly like it. They held the ability to determine how quickly Allied fleets recovered. They held the schedule. They held the certification. They held the data. The arrangement was described as an efficient partnership. Beneath that description sat a structural asymmetry that no formal document named directly. What changed was not the maintenance requirements. What changed was the political environment in which those requirements had to be met. Allies who had previously accepted the centralized structure without question began asking what their actual exposure was. If political relationships shifted, if supply chains were disrupted, if scheduling priorities at centralized facilities moved in directions that did not favor their fleets, what options did they hold? The answer in most cases was limited ones. Leverage entered the conversation at that point, not as accusation but as structural observation. A nation whose fleet recovery depends on facilities it does not control, certified under authority it does not hold, using data it cannot modify, is a nation whose air power availability is determined in part by decisions made elsewhere. That is not a flaw in the original design. It is a feature of centralization that becomes visible only when the assumptions underneath it are tested. Several allies have begun moving toward localization as a direct response to that visibility. Localization in this context does not mean building a complete duplicate of every centralized facility domestically. It means systematically identifying the points in the maintenance chain where external authorization creates the most structural exposure, and working to bring those points inside national control. Certification authority is one target. Approved data access is another. Domestic overhaul capability for the highest demand components is a third. These moves do not represent a withdrawal from NATO cooperation. They represent a recalibration of where dependency is acceptable and where it is not. An ally that can certify its own line maintenance, access its own approved data, and perform overhaul on its most critical components domestically retains cooperative relationships with the alliance while reducing the points at which those relationships translate into structural exposure. The shift is gradual and it is deliberate. Nations are not announcing departures from centralized support. They are negotiating the terms of that support with more specificity than before. They are asking which authorizations can be transferred domestically. They are building technician pipelines that qualify for certifications previously held only by external organizations. They are investing in tooling and facilities that make domestic overhaul viable for components that previously had no option but to travel abroad. These moves do not weaken NATO. They change who holds leverage inside it. The alliance's collective capability does not diminish when a member nation gains the ability to certify its own maintenance work. What diminishes is the degree to which that nation's availability is determined by decisions it did not make and cannot accelerate. The security relationship remains. The structural dependency narrows. When nations gain maintenance authorization domestically, the consequences follow a clear pattern. Fleet recovery accelerates because it no longer waits on external scheduling. Availability becomes more predictable because the variables controlling it are inside the nation's own institutions. Decisions about maintenance priorities reflect national operational requirements rather than the competing demands of a centralized facility serving multiple customers. At the same time, the influence held by nations hosting centralized maintenance facilities contracts. Not dramatically and not overnight, but measurably. Each certification transferred domestically is one less decision that routes externally. Each overhaul capability built inside a member nation is one fewer aircraft that must travel to a facility it does not control. The network remains. Its architecture becomes less asymmetric. Procurement decisions reflect this shift directly. Nations evaluating new aircraft programs are now asking maintenance questions alongside capability questions. Where does the certification authority reside under this program? What access does the operator hold to approved data? Can overhaul be performed domestically and under what conditions? These questions were asked before. They are now weighted differently. The answer to who controls maintenance authorization has become as important to some procurement offices as the answer to what the aircraft can do. Air power becomes political before it becomes military. The missions flown tomorrow depend on the maintenance performed today. The maintenance performed today depends on who holds the authority to say it was done correctly. And that authority for decades inside NATO has not lived where the aircraft lives. It has lived where the program lives. As allies work to close that gap, the distribution of influence inside the alliance shifts. Not loudly, not through confrontation, through the accumulation of certifications, data rights, and overhaul capabilities that move, one program at a time, closer to the nations that depend on them most. NATO air power is no longer defined by jets in the sky, but by the authority to return them to flight. That's all for today. Share your thoughts below, and we will catch you in the next one.